Okay, this will be a two-part video on Kierkegaard. It'll just be the PowerPoint, and then I will be uploading a script probably by Wednesday. And this is just going to give you an idea into the aesthetic stage that Kierkegaard is talking about. I will try and make another couple um, lectures by the end of the week for you to look at. If I don't get to those, this just gives you an overview of what Kierkegaard is doing in his stories. So let's get started. Kierkegaard was an individual, and he believes very strongly that the emphasis should be placed on the individual. If individuals work as they should, then certainly they will contribute to the larger group. But the responsibility and your moral responsibility really belongs in the individual. Putting it into a group is, most existentialists are going to say that that's not going to work because you're always going to be sacrificing your moral beliefs for the group en masse, if you will. This is just a cartoon picture that I liked of Kierkegaard, and I think he was kind of avant-garde. People did like him. The Lutheran Church didn't like him much, and I'll explain why. He was well regarded in Little Copenhagen, and I find his books to be very, very good. A lot of people don't like them, but hopefully I'll be able to get you excited about reading either or some other literature. And perhaps I gave you something really boring to read, and I apologize if I did, but I wanted you to use that to kind of, I'm going to give you the aesthetic stage and then the ethical stage, and then from there I think you'll be able to pick up on what he's doing in the teleological stage. So I'll start out and tell you about his authorship. Kierkegaard was a prolific writer. They're very varied, very diverse. He wrote about half of them in pseudonyms, not to hide his identity. As I said, people knew him in Little Copenhagen, and he was not, no way, shape, or form. It just gave him the ability to write from different perspectives so that the reader can insert themselves into the reading and not have to worry about the barriers that we normally have about self-reflection. But instead, we can look at somebody else and somebody else's life and kind of identify and then live out those possibilities. So you'll see in this slide and some of the different pseudonyms that he used, but in the particular story we're going to talk about an either or. He talks about a young romantic name. It's simply A. Judge William, who's a local magistrate. The seducer, he writes the famous diary. Johannes de Silentio, John the Silent, Victor Eremita, the hermit, John Climacus, the climber. And again, all of them are just to represent different views, and he writes these for this reason. The problem we all face is how to exist as human beings. The characters lend insight to that. We can't solve problems in the abstract, meaning we can't sit and contemplate these. We have to actually live life. We have to be involved. We have to play the game. If you ever notice when you play a game, you sit in the sidelines and it just looks easy, and then they put you out onto the field to play, and oh my goodness gracious, it's a lot more difficult than we thought it would be. Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, all existentialists believe that you must be involved in the game of life. And you can't solve problems. You can't solve the issue of existence without actually being a participant in it. So what he wants to do is he wants to say the problem must be worked out in one's life by choices. It doesn't matter if you make bad choices, but that you learn from those choices, that you overcome those mistakes. That's the most important thing to an existentialist. Why? Because by living, by making choices, you define and you create, and the self becomes. That's the important thing. We don't care who you are, not what your title is. Instead, we care about who you become. So the pseudonym authors present themselves to the reader as selves in the process of such self-creation. And we can see the pluses and the minuses, and they function then for a model in possibilities and ways we can actualize our own lives. They also awaken us to alternatives, and they stimulate us to that self-examination. Kierkegaard calls this indirect communication. He doesn't want to preach at anybody. He simply wants to lay out in front of the reader what could possibly happen if you do something. And then you decide. It's up to you. Again, you're the one who's making the choices in your life. if you talk about existentialism, existentialism at its very core is all about who you become. It's all about taking the blame and being responsible for the choices that you make. Who made you do it? Nobody. You did it. You're free. You have absolute freedom in all of your choices. So what he wants us to do is to remove this self-deception that we have. And he says all of us have that problem. All of us can't see ourselves for what we really are. We're not honest with the things that actually structure our lives. We say that we don't like comfort, but then what do? We do everything we possibly can to make sure that we are comfortable. We say that we're passionate about something, but really we only have kind of a cursory knowledge of it. And so he's trying to shock the reader into self-recognition by looking at the character and then that working as a mirror to show us how we really are. It's also a way to point out to a reader in advance what living like this could possibly yield for them, what kind of consequences, what kind of life would they have. It kind of gives us this dry run and shows us the attributes and the negatives. So one particular problem that Kierkegaard has is with Christians, or with those people who believe they are Christians. And he wants to clarify what it means to be a Christian. He gives a wonderful story, and I gave it to you, about the tame geese and also about the little geese who waddle off to church. They're so excited about hearing that they can fly, and so what do? They, after the church service, they waddle home and they talk about it, but they don't do anything during the week. And he's saying, basically, you have a bunch of fat people sitting in churches who are the bourgeois, who want to live a mediocre life, and they don't ever actually examine their life. They don't ever examine really what it means to be a Christian and who this guy is that they're following. And he has a super big problem with that because he feels that they're being inauthentic. Take stories like Abraham and Isaac, and they look at it and they nod their little heads in church, and then they don't think, gosh, that's really weird. What if God really were to ask people to do things like that? We would think it was weird. Andrea Yates drowns the 5 kids in the bathtub and says God told her that in order to save her children, she'd have to kill them. We think that's weird. Why don't we think that Abraham and Isaac is weird? And he says there's something that we have to reconcile in. We have this ethical life that we're supposed to live, and then we have this teleological life, and we have to reconcile those somehow. So he wants to clarify what it means to be a Christian. He wants to distinguish a real life as a Christian from 2 things. The average bourgeois citizen in Denmark who's baptized as a matter of course. You're just going through the motions. And he has a problem with anybody who goes through the motions in life and who's just bored all the time. And he wants to distinguish the intellectual pursuit from the actual examined life. So reason is going to take a back seat here, and we're going to start thinking about the passions. So Kierkegaard's possibilities, these are the ones, and I'll start on the ethical. The aesthetic life, it's simply to be something. And T.S. Eliot, I wish I could take credit for putting this quote here, but I did borrow this. You are the music while the music lasts. You just are for however long you are, and just accept that and move on. Don't get too involved. Don't get too wrapped up in things. You need to be free. The ethical life is when we develop ourselves, when we are becoming. And then the religious or the teleological life, it's the realization that you desire to be something closer to God, but that you really are just a brute, like an animal, most of the time. And you recognize your failings. And how can you get there? How can you reconcile the infinite with the finite, the temporal with the eternal, those kinds of things. And you have to start recognizing that there are these polar opposites and kind of wonder and awe at those kinds of things. So in the next part, I will show you the ethical.